Hello everybody, my name is Bakiev and I'm your IELTS instructor from New Zealand. My website IELTSTOEFL.com will help you to prepare for your upcoming IELTS exam. Today we will be focusing on IELTS Book 19, Test 3, Writing Task 1. Let's read and analyze the instructions given. The diagram below shows how a biofuel called ethanol is produced. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Firstly, we need to write a great introduction. Here is our first sentence. The diagram illustrates the process of ethanol production as a biofuel, starting from the growth of plants to its use as a fuel source. Now, what do we need to remember? Firstly, you need to use the definite article the here, the diagram, because we know which one, the one that we are looking at. Okay? And here we need to paraphrase. This word shows. Okay, here we can write the word illustrates. And then the process, because we have several steps. Again, we have the exact process. That's why we should use the different article the process of ethanol production as a biofuel, comma, okay, starting from and then to. So you should focus on the first stage and the last stage. So from the growth of plants to its use. Okay. Remember, we should write its use, not his use or her use. Okay, because here we're referring to production. Production is it. That's why its use. Next. This cyclical process involves several key stages, including plant growth, harvesting, pre-processing, and the final conversion into ethanol, with notable carbon dioxide emissions at multiple points. Okay. Cyclical here means that it looks like a cycle. All right? So try to remember this structure. This cyclical process involves several key stages. Okay, and then including, and then you need to include different steps that you can see in front of you. So this is step number 1, number 2, number 3, and so forth. Okay, so here, instead of writing important stages, you could write key stages. And here, with notable carbon dioxide emissions. In this case, notable means that it's obvious, you can see it. And try to remember this structure at multiple points. Multiple here means many. Points here means stages. So that's our introduction. Now let's focus on our body paragraph. Initially, plants and trees absorb sunlight and carbon dioxide, which facilitate their growth. Okay, instead of writing firstly, you could write the word initially, and then make sure to put a comma here. Initially, which means firstly. Plants and trees absorb sunlight and carbon dioxide, which. So remember, you need to write the word which, not who. We need to use which for things, and we need to use who for people. Here, we're talking about sunlight and carbon dioxide. That's why we need to write which. In this case, facilitate basically means help. And their growth, because we're talking about two objects here, and that's why their growth. Next, these plants are then harvested and pre-processed, during which process cellulose is extracted. Okay, here, please remember you need to write the word this, not this. We need to use this for one plant, but because you have several plants, that's why these, all right, not this. Okay. Alrighty. And pay close attention to the word then. I decided to put then in the middle of the sentence, not then these plants are harvested, but here I put the word then in the middle of the sentence, which sounds even more formal. So these plants are then harvested. So here we're using the passive voice. The verb harvest is a regular verb. That's why we need to have this ending ed, harvested and pre-processed. Okay, and remember this structure, during which. Okay, during which, and make sure to put a comma here. So during which process cellulose is extracted. Again, here we're using the passive voice. Next, in the next stage, the cellulose transforms into sugars. So firstly, you're talking about the first stage, and then you're talking about the next stage. So when you're talking about the next stage, use this phrase, in the next stage, not at, but in the next stage. All right. Here we need to use the definite article the. When you start talking about something for the first time, okay, like here we said cellulose, there shouldn't be any the, just any cellulose. But here we are referring to the cellulose that we have mentioned, and that's why we need to use the. So if I use the word cellulose 3 times or 5 times after this word, then I would use the all the time, the cellulose, the cellulose. But when I mention it for the first time, we shouldn't use a the here. Next, the cellulose transforms into sugars. Remember, transforms into, not just in, not just to, but into. Okay, transforms into sugars, which basically means becomes sugars. Next, during this phase, microbes are introduced to assist in the breaking down of the sugars. So when you're talking about this specific process, when you want to explain what's happening here, try to remember the structure. During this phase. Again, here I'm using the passive voice. Microbes are introduced. Here, to assist. Okay, instead of writing to help, here I've written the word to assist because it sounds more formal. To assist in always, all right? And here, in this case, the breaking down of, it's a noun. That's why we need to use a the breaking down of the sugars. Why? Because firstly, we mentioned the word sugars. Now we're talking about sugars again. We know which ones we have already mentioned before, and therefore we need to say the sugars. Next, this leads to the production of ethanol, which is then distributed for use as a fuel. Try to remember this structure. This leads to. So when you're talking about the next stage, right? So these leads to. Not this will lead to, but this leads to, which means it happens all the time. That's what normally happens. Not will happen, but that's what normally happens. So make sure to use the present simple tense here. Next, which is, again, here I'm using the passive voice, which is then distributed for use as a fuel. All right, now let's focus on the next paragraph. Throughout the cycle, carbon dioxide is released, especially when it's being transported by vehicles, trucks, and planes, as well as from the burning of ethanol itself. So, the phrase throughout the cycle, here the word throughout basically means during. Okay, so, and also remember that we need to write the word throughout together, right? It's all one word. So basically during the cycle or throughout the cycle. Carbon dioxide is released. Again, we need to use the passive voice here, especially when it is being transported. Here I'm using the passive voice with the present continuous tense, meaning that it's happening at a particular period, not all the time. All right, next. This carbon dioxide re-enters the cycle as it is absorbed by growing plants, thereby completing the loop. Okay, in this case, re-enters means to enter again. All right, next. And here, thereby basically means that's why, or as a result. And after thereby, always use ing, thereby completing the loop. In this case, the loop means the cycle. We know which one we are talking about, the one in front of us. That's why we need to use the definite article, the loop. Next, in summary, the ethanol production process involves converting plant biomass into biofuel, with carbon dioxide playing a dual role as both an input and an output at various stages. Here, instead of writing in conclusion, it's better to write in summary here. Okay. So again, here we know what kind of production we're talking about, the ethanol production, the one which we are discussing. Okay. After the verb involves, always use ing. Involves converting, so ing. Plant into, so convert into always. Transform into, convert into, turn into. Okay, next. With carbon dioxide playing a dual role. In this case, let me explain this structure. With carbon dioxide playing, that basically means where carbon dioxide plays a dual role. But the structure is a bit more complex, with plus what plus verb ing. In this case, a dual role basically means a double role. And instead of writing different, it's better to write the word various. And again, at various stages. And before we mentioned the word points, so at multiple points. As you can see, I have paraphrased. I don't want to use the same words over and over again. Next, the process highlights the interconnection between biofuel production and the environment. In this case, highlights, it basically means shows. The interconnection means that two or three things are connected with each other. So the interconnection. And also before the word environment, make sure to use the, always the environment. But nature, you can't say the nature, but the environment. All right, guys, I have been very specific and today, and I've paid close attention to a lot of articles here, the definite articles, and then also I've explained to you how to use the passive voice correctly, how to paraphrase different words and phrases, how to use very great and strong linking devices. Hopefully you've learned how to describe a diagram. Good luck to all of you with your upcoming IELTS examination. If you want to prepare for your exam, please visit this website and you'll be able to find specific video courses for your personal needs. Goodbye.